All right, we're at Baltimore Comic Con 2017 talking to Geg Pak. We're going to discuss Mech Cadet Yu, his latest series from Boom. Easily the first question is just where did the concept of Mech Cadet come from?
Yeah, well, about, 20, almost 20 years ago, I started, no, not quite that long. About 17 years ago, I started working on a project called Robot Stories. I was coming out of film school, and I had this, I'd written 3 different short films, basically, about which all in some way dealt with robots. And I realized, hey, I've written 3 short films that all deal with robots. And then I realized they kind of fit together thematically, and I wrote a 4th to kind of flesh it all out. And then I had an anthology film, basically, about basically love, death, family, and robots. And so that movie's called Robot Stories. We shot it in 2000. It came out in the world. We shot in 2001. Came out in the world 2001, 2002. And that kind of launched my career, and actually that got me into comics because eventually my agent sent that over to Marvel, and they liked it, and 13 years later, here I am. But I'd always loved robots, and that making that movie just kind of made me think about it more and more. And so after having made that movie, I just had these other robot stories that kept popping up in my head. And one of them, involved this idea that there are these giant robots who come down from outer space to this one specific spot in Arizona, and they bond with kids. And that was sort of the initial little kernel. I'm not sure exactly where that came from. I mean, I'd always been a fan of robot, big, stories about kids and robots. And I think also, probably part of the inspiration comes from, old Disney movies about kids who, bond with animals and everything,
I got that vibe from it.
Yeah. There's and even, Where the Wild Things Are and stuff like that, you know what I mean? There's something really compelling about a kid becoming friends with some huge, monstrous thing, I'm not sure what that is. I think it has to do with kids feeling small and helpless, and so it's a huge fantasy for kids to have a big friend. You know what I mean? So that was the initial idea, and then the more I thought about it, was okay, well, let's just run with this one idea. Then, if kids are bonding with giant robots, then the government would probably move in, build an academy there, train a military academy, train kids to go meet these robots, bring them into the security apparatus of the planet, and then of course you need a threat, and of course that threat is giant monsters from outer space, and then I had this idea of what would make that fun. It's that you have a kid who shouldn't have gotten a robot who gets a robot and then becomes part of this school. So our hero is Stanford Yu. He's the janitor's kid. His mom is the janitor at the school. Stanford works as a janitor at the school, and he has there's no reason he should ever think he should be able to have a robot. But of course, he would love to. But and the other kids at the school are, they're the elite snobs and all of that, and they look down on the janitor's kid and all that. So he's a great scrappy underdog character. He's smart. He can fix things. That's his thing. He fixes things. But then one day, a robot bonds with Stanford, and then he ends up joining the academy, and so we get this great kind of underdog in an elite academy set up with, and he's got this great rival who is the daughter of the general, who's the one who should have gotten the robot that he ended up with, and so it's kind of this. I joke about it. It's sort of like Harry Potter meets Pacific Rim, So you get that group, the Kid Academy thing, and
I was gonna say a lot of it feels like Pacific Rim for kids in a weird way. With the series, obviously the part of the big of it is the robots themselves and the design. They're all varied, very different. How much of it was you to come up with that? How much was that's the artist?
That's me and Tak talking. That's mostly Tak. Tak Miyazawa is the artist. I love him so much. We've worked on a million things together over the years. We co-created Amadeus Cho back in the day for Marvel, and then we've worked on a bunch of Kickstarter books together, including The Princess Who Saved Herself. And he was the only artist I ever had in mind for this project. He just gets it. I knew that he would deliver with the kids. He's amazing at drawing young people, and he's amazing at drawing everyday people. Yeah, exactly. And he's great at just drawing people in civilian clothes realistically, and he's amazing with just body language, just everyday small expressions that resonate. He's a great actor as a comic book artist. He can be very subtle. He can also get that big sort of have big reactions, almost cartoony style when it's warranted. And he's incredible with the giant robots in the action. I mean, he probably has watched a lot more of the actual Japanese anime than I have over the years. Like the giant robot stuff. And it's just in his, he just loves it. And so I've heard him talk about the designs for the different robots, and it was always, there's one robot that is kind of the deadly man-made robot, and that one has the sort of sharp edges, and it's got the kind of more modern feel. And then the old school robots are kind of more rounded and clunky, a little clunkier, and it's sort of he's paying little homages to the kind of history of giant robots in Japanese manga and anime as well. He's done an incredible job with those designs.
So with the main character, it's not just that he is the janitor's kid, but he's also, I'm going to blank on the nationality of him and his mom. Yeah. And it's clear that that's a big part of it. They're speaking their native language at times. And it's interesting reading it in that, it's a kid's book. Really an all ages book, but starring kids, and you've got that aspect, and then you got this aspect of this kind of ominous government aspect to it as well. So there's this really kind of like a social aspect to the series that you can either read into it and pick up a lot on it, which is I think fantastic, or it's just add some flavor to the story overall, the characters.
Yeah, I mean it was. I always just saw this with Asian American characters, with a lot of Asian American characters. Not everybody's in the story is Asian American, but a lot of them are. Our hero is Stanford Yu. He's Chinese American. He and his mom speak Cantonese. It's totally cool. The general who runs the school is Korean American. He's General Park, and his daughter is Korean American, and then the Skip Tanaka is the grizzled old veteran who was the very first kid who was ever bonded with a giant robot. He's Japanese American, but so part of that was just that's just the way I saw it. You know what I mean? And particularly if I'm going to do an indie book, it's like I'm just going to make it the way I see it. You know what I mean? So on one level, there's no reason for it. It's just because we live in a world with people all different backgrounds, and these are the backgrounds of the characters. For the same reason, Daredevil's Irish. You know what I mean? And it gives and coming from a specific place it makes the characters not generic. It gives you specific things you can play with, and just little details about their daily lives that kind of is going to come in and make it real. Even if you're not of that culture or whatever, it feels more real. Because it is. So that's that's part of that. Also, though, part of it is that I've loved these stories forever, and millions of people love these stories in America and in Japan, and in Asia. But there's very few of these stories. I can't remember any other stories like this that have Asian American characters in them. You know what I mean? And so I thought that would be a fun thing to do. You take this genre that's beloved by folks in Asia and America, but and particularly also beloved by millions of Asian Americans, and do it with Asian American characters. And I think that's just a fun thing to do.
Well, I mean, the other that's really great about it is, but with the detail of his mom, and the reason I bring it up is that it's having the mom work as a janitor along with the kid. Them speaking Cantonese, like that it's a small detail, but it actually, in a way, it tells its own story. I mean, that's I think it was also important to have class differences in the story. You know what I mean? Like the kids. That's what it's really getting at. It just feels like there's a great story about class that's going on.
Like as this thing fleshes out, we've got a world. It's clearly a pretty militarized world. You know what I mean? You've had this threat of these alien invaders known as the Sharg, and the country is clearly, has had to grapple with that in the past. It's this massive trauma. They talk about the Sharg War, and we're the story's set in a military academy. Where kids are being prepared to fly these giant robots, where eventually to defend the planet, so that's, it's a very light story, it's fun, but underneath it, that's, those are
messed up.
Right.
I wanted to ask you about that.
And so, and that kind of, gives it some gravity, and it gives it some, gives you something to chew on and think about and see how everyday people are gonna do what they need to do in a world like that, you know. And also, you know, I think also that notion of, you know, it's in a world that is based a lot on hierarchy, who gets to be the elite and who gets pushed to the side, and what happens when those things get turned over. I think those are always relevant and fun questions to play with. So,
yeah, it's a thing that like I love the series, and the thing that really stood out to me is that it's, you know, it's got some all ages aspect to it, and starting kids, but at the same time, as you kind of brought up, it's kids being trained by the military to do battle, which is a really messed up theme when he gets down to it. And it's a thing in superhero comics as a whole where they always have like teenage sidekicks, and when you think about it, you're like, you know, this is child endangerment. Like, what the hell are you thinking? Was that kind of part of, you know, are you thinking about that a little bit at all as you create the series?
Well, yeah, I mean, part of it is just like, you know, on the one hand, it's just like kids. I mean, we all love stories. We loved stories when we were kids, where kids got to do awesome stuff. And what's more awesome than flying a giant robot and fighting giant monsters? You know what I mean? Like, that's a huge fantasy. It's incredibly fun, and so that's really the birth of it all, right? That's the starting point. But then, you know, when you're telling it as a story, then you can if you take it seriously, you can dig a little deeper and get some more theme. You know, I mean, you then suddenly you're thinking about, like, what does that really mean? What does that mean for the kids? What does that mean for the parents who are sending these kids? You know, like we've got a scene where, you know, where Stanford's basically getting his mom to sign these, you know, to sign the release form for the academy, you know, and she's like, what? Like, the release form? It's a scary release form about, you know, you're signing over responsibility, or you're basically giving permission for your kid to do incredibly dangerous things and possibly get killed.
Yeah, it was the line of like your kid might die or something like that.
Exactly. You know, and so that's. So taking that stuff seriously, I think, makes the whole story deeper and makes it more resonant and makes us care more. It raises the stakes, you know, and you always want to raise the stakes in stories. So, you know, so I mean, it's also that kind of a thing where, as you kind of said, you can read it on, you know, it's an all ages book. You can read it on in many different ways. You know, I hope it's a book that a kid might read when they're 7, and then come back and read again when they're 13 and be like, oh wow, you know, and find another level to it, and then come back when they're 49 and really identify with the mom. You know what I mean? Like, that's the sweet spot. If you can tell a story that can be appreciated by a lot of different folks at a lot of different points in their lives, that's pretty nice.
Yeah, I remember the scene that we were talking about the film at the forum. Like, I loved it because I remember I was probably a little bit older than that, but fell ill, and they're like, we want to put you in a medicine study, and part of it was you could die was part of it, and I looked at my parents and I was like, well, you know, at least I tried to do good was my response, because my parents immediately read that and they're like, no, and I'm just like, well, you know, at least I tried to do good for the world was basically my reaction, and I felt like there was a very similar response to this kid. I'm like, I totally relate to this. This is like, it nailed perfectly. So the series obviously started as a limited series, was how it was, you know, originally solicited, and now it's an ongoing series based on the reaction. For you as a creator, has that shifted at all, the story you're telling, like with the first start?
Well, from the beginning, I when I first was talking to my amazing editors at Boom, Cameron Chitak and Eric Harburn, I said, I've got a 12-issue epic, you know, and then I sent them this big outline for 12 issues. And they're like, it's awesome, that we love it. And then we worked on it, and they said, we can approve it for 4 issues. And then if it does well, we'll keep going. But so I had to think about, like, how am I going to make this work for just 4 issues? If we only get 4 issues, I need to be able to make sure that the story is satisfying to everybody. You know what I mean? Everybody who reads it. They don't feel like, oh, I just got the first act. So that was a bit of a challenge, but I think we did it. You know what I mean? We figured that out. So if it had to end at 4, I was going to give you a good, great, Saki 4-issue story. You know what I mean? That really worked. But I always had this bigger plan and hope to do much more, and so we're fortunately able just to seg into the bigger plan.
So with the bigger plan, you kind of hinted at it a little bit. You know, obviously I think it's the second issue. It brings up that this war happened. There's obviously alien invaders. We still don't quite know the scope of, you know, how has this impacted the United States? How has this impacted the world? Like, what's everything look like? Have you, as a creator, kind of sketched all that out? Yeah,
I mean, we reveal some things bit by bit. Like, I haven't sat down and written an entire history of the world with, like, you know, exact descriptions of what happened everywhere. But the big impacts are, you know, we know what those are, and you're going to get we're revealing it slowly as the series goes on. So you'll get a little bit, that world building we're trying to do organically and compellingly and dramatically as the thing goes on. So you'll learn like about what happened to Stanford's father and about, a little bit more about the different backgrounds of the different characters and the stakes and what happened during the first Sharg War. So yeah, I mean, that stuff we're going to reveal that bit by bit.
Is there, obviously, the concept of kids with giant robots fighting aliens, is that something that we all wanted to do as a kid? Is there anything for you as the creator of this, like one moment that's really stuck out so far of being like, this is like everything I dreamed of growing up?
Oh, wow. Well, man, every single time I get a page from Tak, I'm not even kidding. I just, I just love it. I mean, he sent in this image just last week, which has, there's this moment where, I'll spoil this a little bit, but like Stanford's trying to save his buddy. Like his buddy's up in Olivetti. The kid Olivetti is up in they've been flying, and and Olivetti's robot is has shorted out, and so they're kind of plummeting through the air. And Stanford's up there trying to jumpstart it, So, and there's this panel where Stanford's leaping from his robot to Olivetti's robot, and he's got like, he's got this electrical cable that he's going to try to jumpstart the robot with. And it's just like this little kid, like kind of leaping through the air between these cockpits of these two plummeting robots, and it's just ridiculously thrilling and just a beautiful image. So stuff like that is just like, because you have an idea in your head, and then when you work with a great artist, they take it and they make it like 12 times cooler than and you thought it was really cool when you wrote it, and then it comes back and it's a million times cooler. It's just beautiful. So, and that happens to me every day with him. So the whole book has been a thrill. I mean, I got to say that I'm just incredibly grateful to everybody who's bought the book and read the book and talked it up, because we wouldn't be where we were without you. And this is like, it's my favorite child right now. And the fact that other people like this little baby too and think he's cute is enormous to me and to all of us. So thank you.
Hey, thanks for watching the previous video from Graphic Policy Television. Just by watching, you help support our site. Thank you so much. Now, if you're watching these videos, you probably care about geeky things like movies, television, comic books, toys, games, video games, you name it. You can go and subscribe right now to our YouTube channel to stay in touch and catch all the new videos, or check out our website at graphicpolicy.com. There's a nice link on this end of the video. But as always, thank you for watching. Keep on rocking and keep it geeky.